Hello and welcome to Theology Unleashed. I'm Arjuna, and this is the channel where Eastern theology meets Western skepticism. A few months ago, the Christian apologist and philosopher Dr. William Lane Craig was doing a live stream Q&A on the Christian YouTube channel Unbelievable, and in it he responded to a question which I posed. I've been meaning to do a response video to that, so here goes. Let's start off by playing a clip from the comedian George Carlin, which beautifully captures the type of absurdity which my philosophical query gets at.
Think about it. Religion has actually convinced people that there's an invisible man living in the sky who watches everything you do every minute of every day. And the invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you.
Well, Kevin, this isn't serious critique. This is comedy.
William Lane Craig has actually replied to this clip in a stream he did on Capturing Christianity. I'll get to his reply later. William Lane Craig does have a point, and he did draw a caricature. This isn't quite what Christians believe, but there's still an absurdity exposed in this comedy. It's funny because there's some truth to it. Before I play the clip, I need to clarify a few key concepts. There are two categories of concepts. One relates to the criteria for salvation, and the other category relates to whether or not everyone will be saved and what happens to the people who will not be saved. My question related to the criteria for salvation. More specifically, how can the version of Christian exclusivism, which Dr. Craig defends, be compatible with God being all-loving? By exclusivism here, I mean the idea that sincere practitioners of other religions who dedicate their lives to God will be excluded simply based on sectarian concerns, simply because they chose the wrong church.
Finally, Christians. Yes, I'm sorry. I'm afraid the Jews were right.
The question that Dr. Craig answered related to who will be saved. He was answering the question, how can it be compatible with God being all-loving that some people will go to hell or some people won't be saved? Now, here's the clip, which includes the question I posed and Dr. Craig's response.
Another one here asks on the same subject, how do you square God being all-loving with exclusivism? And they say, surely if God is all-loving, he sent prophets to all parts of the world, all through history, and is more interested in love than doctrinal details, i.e. specifically what you believe.
Oh, well, I would certainly agree with that. I used to speak of Christian exclusivism, but then I changed my terminology because I think that that is a prejudicial word. It gives the impression that God is trying to exclude people from salvation, when in fact, I think he's trying to include as many as he can. So if you think about it, the opposite of universalism ought to be called particularism, Christian particularism. And so that's the terminology that I now adopt, is that not everyone will be saved, but some will be saved and some will be lost. And if you ask for a defense of Christian particularism, it would be based upon human freedom. I think that God's will, as it says in 1 Timothy 2:14, is that every person be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth, but people have freedom of the will to reject God's love and forgiveness, and so to separate themselves from God irrevocably. And God respects that freedom of choice.
Dr. Craig gave two responses. One was that he offered a change in terms, which in his view removes a negative connotation, the idea that God's trying to exclude people. The other argument he gave was the free will defense. The free will defense does not answer the question which I asked. It's fully compatible with religious inclusivism, with the idea that God has sensible criteria for salvation, that some people will simply choose not to take the mercy. There's other arguments I would offer in defense of the idea that everyone will eventually be saved, but that's actually a separate debate. It's also a debate which is being had, and there's some powerful arguments which have been published in defense of religious universalism. Universalism is the idea that everyone will eventually be saved. One of these books is That All Shall Be Saved by David Bentley Hart. I highly recommend it. Unfortunately, Dr. Craig has not read the book.
I haven't read the book.
Which is somewhat unfortunate because David Bentley Hart raises some powerful opposition to William Lane Craig's position. I actually played this clip of Dr. Craig to David Bentley Hart when I had him on my channel for a discussion. Here's an excerpt from his reaction.
I would add to that simply changing the word from exclusivism to particularism, is like, we're not going to call it racial segregation. Let's call it separate but equal. I mean, yes. Shut the hell up. I mean, this is an argument about semantics. It's about whether you really believe in a God who is so preposterously stupid and incompetent and cruel.
He has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke.
That he cannot and will not save a certain number of his creatures from, in Craig's theology, eternal suffering, just to make the point that God's all-loving. Because, nothing says infinite love like the infliction of eternal torment.
But he loves you.
What I would say is I detest that habit of thinking you can argue your way out of a moral, logical scandal by changing the word you use.
In defense of Dr. Craig, it could be said that he wasn't trying to argue his way out of a logical scandal simply by changing the word. What he was doing was trying to avoid an undeserved negative connotation which the word exclusivism brings to the discussion. Pushing back on this defense, I would say that the negative connotation is deserved. The word exclusivism perfectly encapsulates the ideas contained in the views which Dr. Craig defends. In Craig's view, God is excluding people based on the doctrinal commitments which they hold, rather than based on the quality of their consciousness, the principles which they live by, and the purity of their love for God. The version of theism which I defend and offer as an alternative, we could call it universal religious principles theism. Just as there's laws of physics which apply all over the world in every culture, in a similar way, there's universal religious principles which apply all over the world and in every religion. On this view, God doesn't discriminate based on what church you're a member of, what beliefs you hold, and so on. Instead, he discriminates based on your attitude, the purity of your love, and the principles which you live by. Now I'll show Dr. Craig's response to the George Carlin comedy clip.
Well, Kevin, this isn't serious critique. This is comedy. Indeed, it's mockery. And so he sets up a caricature, which he then makes fun of. The Christian conception of God is not a man in the sky. It's a transcendent, personal creator and designer of the universe who is the locus and source of absolute moral goodness.
The atheist YouTuber Rationality Rules has responded to this part of the clip brilliantly.
Carlin obviously knew that Christians don't believe in a literal man in the sky, and so yes, he was setting up a caricature for comedic purposes, but his critique wasn't at all predicated on the tangibility of God. It was predicated on the contradiction of an all-loving God infinitely punishing someone for a finite crime.
Forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you.
And hence his critique very much applies to contemporary Christianity, and while we're at it, it applies to Islam too. Carlin was mocking the divine judicial system due to its logical inconsistency.
In the rest of Dr. Craig's response, he lays out the free will argument.
And the list of 10 things, I take it that that's a reference to the 10 commandments. And it's neither the teaching of Old Testament Judaism nor Christianity that if you break any of the 10 commandments, God is going to send you to burn in hell and to torture you. Rather, what Christianity is like, if I can give an analogy, is that it's like a condemned criminal who has been found guilty of a capital crime and sentenced to death and is on death row. And then the governor or the president, out of mercy, bestows upon him the offer of a complete pardon for his crime, which the guilty person is then either free to accept or to reject. And if he rejects it, then of course he will fall back onto the just desert of the justice system and the sentence will be carried out. So it's entirely up to us whether or not we want to accept God's loving and gracious pardon for our wrongdoing or whether we choose to reject his love and forgiveness.
There's two ideas missing from Craig's theology, which open it right up to the ridicule that atheists level at it, such as rationality rules. The two ideas that are missing are, one, that God will offer infinite opportunities for souls to return to him, and two, that souls will eventually make the right choice if given enough opportunities to. The first idea is very easy to defend. God is claimed to be full of mercy and love and compassion. He's also claimed to be the greatest being imaginable, from which it follows that God would offer unlimited opportunities for souls to return to him. The second point is a little bit harder to defend, as it involves explaining what free will is and how it works. Free will describes the desiring of the soul to vary its experiences. The soul is always desiring greater pleasure or better experiences. One way we could describe this is to say the soul is always oriented towards the good. Now, the soul can be mistaken about what the good is. We could be pursuing the good but going down the wrong path. We could think something is good when really it's bad. But invariably, the soul is pursuing the good. Given enough time, this exploration of the soul, an endeavor or attraction towards the good, will eventually bring us to God. This is, of course, if we accept the premise that God is the greatest being imaginable and is the greatest source of happiness. Bhagavad Gita describes how we give up a lower taste by experiencing a higher taste. There is a non-zero probability of us experiencing a higher taste at some point in our travel through multiple lifetimes. And once we experience that higher taste, we will become attracted to it and give up the lower taste. So you have a non-zero probability of attaining something. And once you attain it, you're eternally fixed at that new level. So anything which has a non-zero probability of happening will happen if given enough time. It follows from this that given enough chances, all souls will eventually turn to God and make it to heaven. One thing I find odd about this idea that some souls are eternally damned due to misusing their free will is that they don't seem to think that in this life. In this life, they're willing to go out of their way to try to share the gospel with all kinds of people. It seems a little odd that at death it becomes sealed in stone. And also we see in this life that some of the most depraved people you could imagine actually transform their lives in the most amazing ways. If that can happen to people who are depraved beyond imagination in this life, then why would it not be possible in a future birth where some of these depraved souls to reincarnate? There may be other objections which could be raised against the theology which I'm presenting. I'll address those in future videos. In this video, I've responded to William Lane Craig's responses to my question and to the George Carlin clip, and I've offered an alternative theology. There are two ways in which William Lane Craig's views fall short. The first is that it holds that God judges us based on sectarian criteria rather than universal criteria, that he's partial to particular tradition and particular faith rather than making his mercy accessible across all cultures and traditions. The other way in which it falls short is the free will defense misunderstands what free will is and how it works. And it also holds that God doesn't give us unlimited opportunities, which is inconsistent with the claim that God is all-loving. This has been my response video to William Lane Craig's answers to these questions. Thanks for tuning in. Please give us a like and be sure to subscribe. Let us know what you think down in the comments. Hare Krishna.